Will penguin poo save the world?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Answers News for Monday, June 2nd, 2025.
In today's top story, climate change researchers may have found a stinky solution, all right, to climate change. Hello, I'm Dr. Georgia Purdom. This is Dr. Gabi Haynes and Dr. Marisa Tillery. And in our first article, penguin poo creates clouds that help cool the planet. All right, there is a story, headline you probably never thought you'd hear, but the idea is that these are the Adelaide penguins down in the Antarctica, and their poo, which is also called guano, okay, they find that it actually seeds clouds, okay, so it helps to make clouds basically from the ammonia that comes off, and those clouds then in turn help climate change because they reflect the sunlight back out into space and keep the planet a little bit cooler. Now, it was really interesting. They said that how they discovered kind of the fact that they're releasing like this amount of ammonia and things is they measured the air near a colony of 60,000 Adelaide penguins. That is one stinky job.
Yeah, I'm really glad
I did a lot of
strange
things as a as a graduate student, but this would not be on my list.
No, definitely not.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm really glad that stench doesn't transfer through reading the paper. That would not be good. Well, yeah, this just goes to show that just the interconnectedness of life on Earth and the way that everything contributes and the importance of biodiversity, of course. And from a biblical worldview, we understand that it's important to care for the environment, care for the world. Of course, that doesn't come at the expense of human flourishing. We know humans are the pinnacle of creation, created in God's image, so we are the most important. But we were given a mandate to care for God's creation. That includes things like penguins and everything up there in the Antarctic. And so from a evolutionary perspective, though, they don't really have that same foundation. Why should we care for our world? Why should we care for our planet? If everything is just cycles of evolution, then we should let nature take its course, right? So it's only the Christian worldview that has a foundation for caring for the world.
Even because extinction is good in their worldview.
In their worldview, yeah.
So, in their worldview, it has to happen. Just let it go and it has to happen. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting, we do articles on climate change on a pretty regular basis. And what always kind of gets me with all of these is the fact that the more and more they do look at, global temperatures may be rising, all right, animals have the ability to adapt. They are resilient. Like God designed them for that. Because ever since the flood, there's been lots of fluctuations in the temperature over time. We went through a little ice age, right? Back in the early thousands. Basically, we went through one of those. And so the climate has changed over time, but organisms deal with that. And they were talking in this article, too, about how one of the other things that happens when climates change is that people innovate, okay? We are able to do that. We're not at just the mercy of the environment. And they talk about electric wallpaper. I was like, this is a new one. I have not heard of this before, but there is such a thing in the UK to help cut heating emissions, right? And they've got beehive fences that are literally what they sound like. They're actual beehives that keep elephants from going into areas where there are human populations and destroying farmers' fields and things like that. So those are really great ways that humans can do things to be able to offset some of these climate changes. And it's a lot better. We did an article several weeks ago on how I think it was in the UK too, they're wanting to dim the sun. Okay, I just think that's a bad idea. Right? They're wanting to put something up that actually reflects, like here, this is natural, right? We're talking penguin poo. So this is a natural product, right, that is able to make clouds and reflect the sun, but they're saying, there's, up in the UK, obviously we're talking other side of the planet kind of, we'll just have to dim the sun to help us with this. But there's a lot of problems when humans try to do that because all of these things are very interconnected, right? And they're working just fine, right? We're not boiling, all right? We're not having these significant changes that a lot of times they want to say that we're having. And so there are ways that, again, God has designed the environment, how they interact with each other, how all this works, to be able to absorb and deal with these kinds of things as they happen. So
I know nowadays, especially, there's a lot of fear mongering happening with climate change and just what the future might hold for people. But we know from God's word that springtime and harvest, these seasons will keep on going until Jesus comes back. And we have to look forward to that new heavens and a new earth that he's promised us. So we don't have to be afraid. We don't have to live in fear. And if you want answers to how to look at climate change from a biblical perspective, check out one of our newer resources, Climate Change for Kids and Parents too. Parents, you'll be surprised how much you learn from this book as well, giving you solid biblical answers to the climate change questions.
yeah, it's a great resource. All right, majority of Gen Z would marry an AI, survey says.
Survey
Okay.
says.
So I have chatted. I guess it sounds weird to say you chat with AI, but that's kind of what you do, right? You're talking to it, you're asking it questions, and it's giving you answers. And so I've done a little bit of that, but people, it says, are already using AI to date and to flirt. And I'm like, okay, they might call it that, but that's not what it is, because AI is not a person, right? You can only date and flirt with like actual people and marry actual people. But instead, these young people, sadly, they're called, it actually has a name. It's called AI relationships. Okay, that's the new word they've come up with to describe this. And it said in this survey just recently that of 2000 Gen Z, 8 in 10 said they would consider marrying an AI partner.
Totally crazy. Yeah, this company that put out this survey, of course, they're going to poll people that favor their agenda, right? But the goal of their company is to allow users to, quote, indulge in romance, practice dating, and explore their fantasies. So you can kind of see how dangerous this could potentially be. Especially, we've reported in other news articles where there's been young people who unalived themselves because they were chatting with an AI bot, and that AI bot told them to take their life. So there's just some really potentially difficult consequences that could come as a result of this. And in today's world, it's already hard to distinguish fact from fiction when you don't have that solid basis of God's words. You don't know what's really true. So why would you form a relationship with a non-real entity, already complicating that matter?
It's just really sad because it says that a lot of young adults believe that they can have a deep emotional bond with AI, and that's you were talking about the hormones and everything,
right?
So it just, can you say some more about it?
Yeah, so they were saying, I was listening to this woman who's done a lot of research on this, and she was saying that a digital relationship basically, quote unquote, like, be talking to somebody on social media, okay, that kind of a thing, it doesn't release the same hormones in your brain as it does when you're in person with somebody. It's just different. And those hormones help you bond to that person. But even though people might digitally have a lot of friendships, they're not the deep type of friendships that people have with people when they're in person with them.
Yeah, and AI, it's gonna mirror your thoughts, the way that you talk. It's gonna mirror the way that you react to things. So what those people are doing, they're just creating their own idol, creating someone that they want to have a relationship, which is just like them. So they're just having a relationship with themselves. It's just selfishness, and then in the article talking about, like, because they have a lot of judgment with the social media. If you don't like social media, if you have a judgment with social media, you don't have to be in social media, And I think for us parents, we have to, of course, be aware of situations like that and call that to ourselves, to not be all the time seen in a phone, because, it's just like sometimes you don't want your kid to just think about you like you in a phone, all the time. So that's to call the responsibility to us first, and then also to teach them that for you to have a life, you do not have to have social media. You don't have to have a phone. You don't have to have a TV. You don't have to have all of those things that the world just tell us, you should have. No. So, it's important for us to teach our kids those things because they're becoming dangerous. They're becoming dangerous for them. And for young adults, also because they're just so empty of good, solid stuff, and they're just looking for a relationship with a computer, which is something. It's not a person. They're not having a relationship with a person. It's just with a thing. And this confusion parents can help a lot, kids and young adults with that type of stuff.
I think it also underscores the importance that there really is a loneliness epidemic across the world, and people are looking for those deep, meaningful relationships, and they're not going to find it in AI. So where are they going to find those things? What else can they turn to? That's why God provided us the church, to come alongside each other, to do life together, to be that community as we're all seeking and striving that relationship with God and making that our focus in life.
And talking about that, just also another call for us as church to be a companion, to want to serve, to want to be someone to be counted on, and not just isolate ourselves, but to be open to have people, to bring coffee or a cake or bread or something. I love any of those if you want to come to my house. And to be that type of person, because the world is needing relationships, is needing people connection, and we need to be, the church need to be the ones that are doing that.
And I think too, a lot of times people say are finding their worth and their identity in how many likes they get, right? And how they put themselves out there on social media. And that's not. And so then they do get very fearful and anxious when people judge them or comment on that, right, wrongly. And so they live in a state of fear and anxiousness, right? But we know when we have a relationship with Jesus Christ that, first of all, we have the Holy Spirit as our helper. And secondly, we're not to have a spirit of fear. It specifically says that in the Bible in 2 Timothy 1:7. We're to have a mind of a power, love, and a sound mind, right? That's what our spirit's supposed to be, of not fearful. And we need to be engaging in these relationships. And as Gabi said, the church plays a very important role in that, in helping people, and really, so they're not turning to this. And they even said in this article, Common Sense Media, which is a popular kind of website, talks about media and the relationship with people. And they said AI companions are not safe for anyone under the age of 18 because they get this emotional attachment and dependency on something that isn't real. Right? And so we don't want that. And so, I know it goes against what the whole world is telling us, so to speak, that you need to be on your phone and you need to be on social media and all this. But again, you don't need those things. What you do need is a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? Yeah. That is your true need. And that's what we need to be focused on, and how we can best live that out in this world. Sure. All right. Research finds compelling evidence of possible Noah's Ark remains in one country. And so this was so every so once in a while, articles like this come out, like, oh, we may have found Noah's Ark. And so you can kind of see here how it looks sort of like a kind of a bowl-shaped depression. This is probably a better picture of it right here. So you can kind of see that, right? It sort of looks that sort of roundish thing there in the middle. And so we're going to talk first about what they found, all right? And then we're going to talk about some of the problems with it. So this is a company called Noah's Ark Scans, and they say that they've analyzed this site, and so that's why they believe that this is maybe Noah's Ark. So one of the things they found is that there's a lot of organic matter and potassium sort of inside that bowl-shaped figure there. And they said, well, that could be from decaying wood, right? Or other organic materials that would have been on board Noah's Ark. All right, so what are some other things that they found?
So they were looking at the soil samples on the inside of the ark. They thought that was different from like the outside mud flow area. And they were like, oh, look, the shape of this formation is of similar size to what the Bible says how big the ark was.
I think that when you want to see something, it's easier for you to see. I don't know how many of you look at the clouds and you see elephants and roses. If you're in love, you're always going to see roses there. And some people in love even see the name of your lover written in the clouds and all this kind of stuff. And I think that that's the same thing that is happening here, because all of those points that they're saying, I mean, it can be very easily answered, with the shape of the geological structure. They have limestone. So all of those things can be very easily answered with no problem, which, we're not against anyone finding Noah's Ark. We are not against, I personally think that would be kind of cool, but I don't think that it doesn't really make any sense for that to be found in that area because it has a lot of volcanic activity, volcanoes around there. So even if it was there, it would have been destroyed already. So that's one of the points. And the people need to think that even if they found Noah's Ark, a lot of people would not believe in God and would believe in the Bible because of that. Because we can have a really good example of what happened during the people walking for 40 years in the desert, and all of those things that God did not really change the way that they were thinking and seeing God. So it's very important for us to understand all of that. And if you really want to find Noah's Ark, go to the Ark Encounter. You're going to see Noah's Ark right there.
Yeah. And this is in Turkey, by the way, in Durupinar. See if I can pronounce that. And one of the other things they did was they did these ground penetrating scans, basically, and they said, it kind of looks like there's a corridor and there's some angles there that might be the rooms on the ark. And so again, they're looking at all of this evidence, and they already have the mindset, as Gabi said, that this is Noah's Ark. So everything they see is going to be interpreted in light of that. And one of the researchers, not one of the researchers, but one of the things that Dr. Andrew Snelling, who's our geologist here at Answers in Genesis, one of the things he said was that, it's kind of interesting that they're finding, higher rates of organic matter inside the bowl, but at the same time, the bowl, right, it's shaped kind of like a bowl, so the rainwater collects there more, and so you get more vegetation and more growth than you would in the mud flow areas that are around it. So, of course, you would have more organic matter there just because of the way it's shaped, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what you get. So that's another interpretation of there's a lot of organic matter there.
So just bouncing off of what Dr. Haynes was saying, the Ark's discovery isn't necessary to validate the truth. We already have the Genesis account. We have the Old and the New Testaments pointing to that account, telling us that it's true. But beyond that, we do have evidence. We have billions of dead things buried in rock layers, laid down by water all over the earth. We're going to talk about later, scars of the flood show up all around the world, and yet that's still not enough to point people to the Bible, to the saving gospel. So it's never really an evidence issue. It's always a heart issue.
Yeah, and if you get on our website and just type in Durupinar, Durupinar, because people have suggested this site for many, many years now, and Dr. Snelling has done some wonderful just research into that and looking at that, and again, helping us, there's other interpretations of this material. It's not necessarily the Ark. And there's no plans to actually dig it up. That would be the easiest thing, right? So just start digging and see what's there. That would be an easy way to resolve it. But the Turkish government doesn't want people to do those kinds of things and so it's going to be this constantly going kind of thing as to whether or not it's there. But like I said, either way, the best evidence we have that Noah's Ark was real is the Bible, right? And that's God's word. And so we know that's true, regardless of whether we find it or not. All right, French Lamarckism.
Before you move on,
go ahead.
If you want to more information about these things, or just want to understand more about the flood and how to look at that from biblical worldview, we have this book, A Flood of Evidence. It's the unofficial Answers book, number 5, part of our Answers series. That'll take you through all of the questions, the most asked questions about the flood that we've gotten over the years to really equip you with answers there.
Yes, thank you for the reminder, because I usually forget the books. Okay, French Lamarckism beats Darwinism in China's groundbreaking study on evolution. Okay, so So I don't know that it's all that groundbreaking, but anyways, that's what they think it is. So Lamarck. So this is a scientist kind of around the time of Darwin, a little bit before him, but around that time, that used to say, okay, he came up with something called the theory of inherited acquired characteristics. So the idea was, and so you've probably seen this picture before. So the reason the giraffe's neck is really long, it used to be really short, but it kept trying to reach up for the leaves on the tree more and more and more. And so with each successive generation, because it wanted to reach those leaves, the neck got longer, and that's why we have long-necked giraffes today. So they didn't know anything about genes and DNA like we do today. Okay, so we kind of look at this and laugh, and we're like, yeah, that's not how that happens, right? You inherit genetic material, it's in your DNA, as to why giraffes have long necks, right? It's not because they're trying to reach the leaves on a tree. But that being said, there actually is a form of Lamarckianism that is real. And that is what we call epigenetics. And so, Marisa, she's my fellow geneticist up here. So
we got two of us today.
Yeah,
epigenetics.
I'm not talking about the subject.
She's a paleontologist, so.
We'll get you later. How about that?
Okay, good.
All right. Epigenetics. Epi meaning around or about, over, genetics, genes, DNA, that sort of thing. So there are these modifiers that can be placed on the genome to basically affect how the genes get read or expressed. So you can get these changes that don't affect the actual DNA itself, unlike a mutation, which you're probably all familiar with. So these are really cool, and like Dr. Purdom was saying, it's not super novel that these can be inherited between generations, so you can pass on these markers to your children. But it is really cool, and it does tell us a lot about how different changes can get passed down between generations, but not affect the genome. And this is all consistent with a biblical worldview and the biblical creation model. Did you want to discuss that, Dr. Purdom? Or?
Yeah, so one of the things about epigenetics is, again, as she said, it doesn't affect the sequence of the DNA, it just affects the expression of the DNA, basically how the DNA is read. And so it can be impacted by the environment. So in this study, they were looking at rice, and so they found that rice that's grown where it's very cold has the ability to obviously to tolerate the cold. And so they did a lot of studies to really show that this has nothing to do with a change in the sequence of the DNA, because there's some rice, it's the same kind of rice, same species and everything, but it's not cold tolerant, and it has to do with being in a cold environment and the methylation, these epigenetics being basically different when it's in a cold environment versus when it's not. And they did pretty conclusive studies on this. I feel like this is one of the better studies on epigenetics to show this. And so that's great, right? That allows organisms to be able to adapt to varying environments, like we talked about before with climate change. So that's a really good thing. But what gets me when they talk about this is that we have to remember that evolution does not have a mind. So evolution can't be forward thinking, right? And it can't say, gee, I better design a system so that in case the temperature changes and I need to adapt, that I will have the ability to make that change. Okay, evolution just lives in the moment, so to speak. If it doesn't use it, it loses it, okay? It doesn't have a mind, it can't think like that. So that is one of my major issues with epigenetics. How do you explain this by evolution, right? But it's easy to understand and explain if you think about a designer God who knew organisms were going to live in a fallen world, who knew the environments were going to change, and that they would have to be able to adapt and deal with that and live with that he would design mechanisms to allow them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with evolution, because all the research here, they're pointing to evolution, but it has nothing to do with evolution. It's actually, as Dr. Georgia was saying, evolution cannot explain that. At all. Only a biblical worldview can explain all of those mechanisms happening, and so there's nothing to do with evolution.
Yeah, it just blows my mind. Not only would evolution have to think of the problem that's going to come in the future that it hasn't seen yet, but it also has to think of the mechanism for how it's going to solve the problem that it hasn't seen in the future. Right. So all of that is just absolutely insane to think about. But we know epigenetic changes, they're super cool, and they allow for rapid adaptation and variation within the created kinds, of course, not switching from one kind to another, like cats to dogs or dogs to humans, but just staying within the kind, allowing them to adapt to various environments. It's all consistent with the Genesis account.
And we do have a great book called Glass House that talks a lot about these evolutionary ideas and the problems with them, right? Of evolution by natural selection or mutation or any of those things like ape man to human, all those different kinds of evolutionary myths and why it truly is a glass house. It's easily broken because there's just a lot of problems when you look at it from a scientific level. All right, a red dot, a 43,000-year-old fingerprint, and a stone out of place, potential evidence of Neanderthal pareidolia. Okay, now if you're like me, you were like, what does pareidolia mean? That's a new word for me. All right, so I looked it up, and it means basically a tendency to perceive a specific or meaningful image in a random or visual pattern. So it's like Noah's Ark, kind of, right? So they were looking at it and they said, oh, that's Noah's Ark, right? Because we think it should be in this area. Or people have claimed they see a picture of Jesus in a potato chip, okay? So I just think of that. Every so once in a while, you'll see that. People are like, oh, look, and it's like, no, you're just projecting that onto it, right? So if you look at this stone here, all right, so kind of imagine with me, the eyes are kind of at the top, the little red dot in the middle is the nose, and the thing at the bottom is a mouth. So you can kind of see that, right? Now, the thing that makes this so fascinating is that it comes from the age of quote unquote Neanderthals. Okay, so they would put them at about 40,000 years ago. And so it's obvious that that little red dot is actually, you can see the fingerprint pattern in the dot. So this was intentionally placed by a human finger.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, biblical creationists have been saying for forever that Neanderthals, they were fully human. And evolutionists are only now catching up to that and saying, yeah, you guys are kind of right about this. One of the things that they point out in this article is that they were kind of like surprised that, not that the Neanderthal isn't human and that it's doing this thing, but that the capacity to convey meaning through marks, symbols, and images has often been considered a key distinction that separated modern humans cognitively from our ancient evolutionary cousins. So we, basically humans, like to assign symbolic messages, maybe this face or whatever. Unrelated to prepping for news this morning, I was talking to my coworkers and somehow we got on the subject of rock collecting, and we were saying, oh yeah, what's the coolest rock in your collection? We were all sharing cool rocks that we found as kids and then kind of as adults as well. But one of the things too that this study says is that this rock that is found with this fingerprint on it is made up of a quartz-rich granite that's not found in the site where the rock was found. So it must have been transported over the distance in the hand of a Neanderthal. So I'd like to think of this full human being who just picked up a rock and decided they were going to take it with them and maybe assign some meaning to it, making this face on this rock.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we have to understand, that this idea that those people were not capable of doing things, but we human, we are, is the idea of the worldview being applied right there, because they believe that they were not well developed, that they didn't have knowledge, but we are, because we are the more developed, the more evolved group. So this is the evolutionary worldview applied right there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's one of the earliest known human fingerprints, actually, which is really cool. And so Dr. Jennifer Rivera is a forensic scientist here, and she's a fingerprint analyst. And she said you can tell, too, it's from the tip of the finger, not like from this part of the finger, because there's certain patterns you see which help identify fingerprint pattern. And so she said you can tell it's from the tip, which is really cool, because somebody dipped their finger in paint, right, and put it right on the stone, right where they thought the nose should go. So I just thought that was like really cool. Like when you analyze that, what you can tell from that. So anyway, Neanderthals are fully humans too. More evidence to indicate that. All right, in our last article, amber in Cretaceous sea deposits contains traces of ancient large-scale tsunami. So what this article is lamenting is the fact that it's really hard to tell when you have these catastrophic conditions that have happened in the past sometimes. At least that's the claim in the article. And so what they found is amber, which is from the tree sap that then like hardens. A lot of times you'll see it around insects or things like that. And then you can look at the insects. They said because of the way that the shape that this amber has that they found in a quarry, they can tell that it was deposited, originally made on land. It was taken out to sea, and which is why it has these modifications kind of to it. And then obviously they say that was 115 million years ago. And then now it's back on land again, and that's why they're finding it in these quarries. But they can tell that, this must have been, their thinking was that this was swept out.
Yeah.
Like, how when a tsunami is coming and all the stuff goes out to sea first and then comes back onto land. That's what their idea is about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they think this was deposited when the region was a deep sea floor. Some of the other evidence that they found that kind of point to tsunamis in these areas were evidence of earthquakes, destruction of the seafloor, trees on what was then the seafloor, and those trees aren't eroded. They haven't faced any sort of rotting. They've just been deposited as trees. So this all points to rapid deposition of sediment layers over these things, preserving them quickly, not over long periods of time, which kind of sounds like the biblical flood model, doesn't it?
Yeah, in early Cretaceous, which is this layer, it would be close to the end of the flood. So, there was a lot of tsunamis happening during the flood, and we have, I don't know why they were talking about like it's hard to trace ancient tsunamis. There's rocks that shows a lot of information about tsunamis, about all of those things that happen, and it's just so really interesting to see that more and more, even though they don't talk about Noah's Ark, they see signs, they see points that confirms what happened during Noah's flood.
Yeah. It's not 115 million years old.
No,
it's
not
only
at
about
all.
4,500 years old.
Yeah.
All right. So to finish off today, just a reminder, we have a wonderful magazine that I love the magazine because it's how to build that biblical worldview. How do we do that and do that well? When we look at science and we look at culture, which is what we talked about today. So this is a quarterly magazine that comes out. It has the version for adults and young people, and then it also has a kids magazine that has tons of great activities for kids, science experiments. They really learn about God's world, starting with God's word. And I always say about these magazines, they're not woke. Okay, they ain't woke. All right, so you're going to learn the truth in these magazines, and very, very current issues that we're talking about there. Just interesting things. It's beautifully designed. We just came back from the Evangelical Press Association where we won, I think, 15 awards for Answers Magazine and Kids Answers. So it really is a great gift, a great tool. You've got a lot of graduations this time of year, something that goes all year long. So I encourage you to sign up on our website. Encourage you to do that. You'll get a free gift with that. And so just a wonderful way to equip the entire family with the truth of God's word. All right, we're out of time for today. So we'll see you back here next Monday.
See ya.